to the cloud. Okay, so you just heard that request again, just for actually there's no new arrivals, but just to put on the recording. If you do have an issue hearing or seeing Swati, please let us know immediately in the chat window and we'll address it. If it's just a concern with a question, please put it in the chat window and I'll monitor that for her later on. And as I said, the only other request is to please remain on mute so that we don't have any background noise. We'll give it, I've got 12:01, we'll give it one more minute and we'll get going. Okay, so I'd like to introduce Swati Seela, who's going to give us a presentation, as mentioned, on practical AI that can help you as a tester. So I'm going to pass the screen over to her and stop my presentation, and we'll let you get going. So just let me stop for a minute and take over at your convenience, Swati. I'm going to turn off my video and audio so you don't get background from me either.
Good. Thank you, Neil. Just gonna get everything figured out. All right, there we go. Can you guys, everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today and welcome. In this session, I'd like to go over a couple of high-level, beginner-friendly AI topics that testers can realistically use. And these are hands-on ways that we can use AI as a tool to reduce repetitive work, improve productivity, and strengthen technical decision making. Again, this is going to be, like I said, a little bit high level, but if there's any appetite for more in-depth concepts, that can be future webinar topics. Or you could connect with me offline after this session, and I'm happy to talk about those topics. A little bit about me. My name is Swati, and I have been a QA for 20 years. I started out as a QA analyst, and then I worked as an automation engineer, a test lead, mostly on the technical side. Although I I have a huge process orientation as well, so I would say QA is my area of specialization, and I write pretty regularly on QA-related topics on softwaretestinghelp.com and Medium. With that intro, let's just get started on these on the next portion of this session. So the first few slides and skills, we are going to explore the opportunity of using AI as a coding assistant. For our talk today, I'm going to demo a few concepts here and there using GitHub Copilot, but this can be any other tool of your choice, including something as ubiquitous as ChatGPT, or you could get more specialized, like using Cloud Desktop, or a lot of the IDEs like JetBrains and Visual Studio Code. They come with their own AI assistants, native assistants, and the concept and the mode of operation is pretty similar with any tool of your choice. Again, like you're seeing on my screen, just a quick check, you're still seeing my presentation. Is that right, Neil? All right, I'll take that as
Yes.
a yes.
Sorry, I had to find the volume button there. Yes, we are. We're seeing simplified coding or ask chat on the middle of
Thank
your
you.
screen.
So Yeah, so this is kind of what I'm assuming most of you must have experimented with, which is asking any of the AI assistant like a GPT or a Copilot a question and getting an answer back. Most of the time, AI sounds like it knows what it's doing, but there are some gotchas there that we gotta be careful about, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But vibe coding, again, if even if you're not an automation tester and you're not coding per se, that kind of having an assistant, an intelligent assistant that can answer questions for you can be extremely helpful. The safest and easiest way to get started and engage with AI is to just start asking it questions, because at this point you're still in control. All you're doing is delegating some maybe search functionality or delegating some repetitive tasks to AI at this point. It's not doing the task for you, but it's kind of giving you answers that can help you make quick progress. So the advantage of this mode is actually that it is like you're like dipping your toes into exploring AI functionality at this point. So we, the easy thing about this is you don't need any understanding of the LLM models or how neural networks are being, formed, or any of those deeper AI concepts at this point. So it's something that can be adopted super quickly and super easily. Some of the use cases that I found to be extremely helpful in this mode is a lot of new testers who inherit automation repos or who inherit a bunch of. So, one of the teams that I was working with had these old mainframe scripts that they did not have a deep understanding of what they were doing. So, Copilot was pretty effective at doing a quick skim through on the repository and giving us a quick gist of what exactly those scripts were doing so that we could evaluate whether they were still fit for our need, or they needed to be scrapped and turned into something else. One of the things I especially use it is we have a lot of automation that needs Splunk logs to be read to ensure that the events that we think are happening are actually happening or not. What that means is a lot of regular expressions have to be created for us to extract the exact event information from it. I mean, if you force me to write a regular expression, I can. It's just that I don't enjoy it. And that's something that AI is really good at doing for me. However, you will have to, once it generates that regular expression, it is up to us to make sure that we put it through all the edge case testing and make sure that that regular expression that it generates is correct or not. But it really gets you to that point where the friction of having to sit down and formulate that regular expression is taken out of the equation. So that's kind of how I use AI, just to get an overall understanding when I'm starting something brand new, or if I'm looking at a particular place in the code that I want to immediately get to. Again, a lot of these answers depend on the context that you're providing to your AI assistant, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail as we progress through this presentation. The next topic is where you go one step further from the asking a question to actually using your AI assistant as your pair programmer. This is where the agent mode can become really powerful, because the AI assistant will not only just provide you with static answers, it can actually implement those. Again, it goes without saying you need the right guardrails here. Otherwise, if you are not in control and let the agent mode make changes willy nilly, sometimes what I have personally found in my experience is it finds a solution that is much more complex, and there might be a simpler solution that you could easily go for. So it increases complexity sometimes in the solutions that it comes up with. The other area where I found this to be quite, I mean, I was a little bit taken aback when this happened, was we think AI is a very intelligent, entity, but that is not always the case. It makes simple syntax errors, like it inserts extra braces when there need not be. that happens, I feel like it's because it's not really getting the entire context or the entire code into picture. And in my experience, it has also inserted lines of code that reference libraries that are not already imported into your system. So, agent mode, I have used it to create tests, to make framework changes, to find and fix problems. And depending on the test harness, again, if it's a simple test harness like a PyTest or something, you can also actually make it run your tests and report the results. That's quite powerful, but again, it comes with its set of challenges. So it is a good idea for us to always be in charge and use our tester's judgment before we accept any of the AI output that it generates. The output that AI generates is actually quite impressive because, like I said, it is just bulky. And sometimes, if you want explanation to go with the solution, it creates markdown files. So all of that's great, but again, sometimes all of that extra files into your repo, all the extra complex logic that it implements is actually probably not what you'd like. It's probably not on brand with how you operate within your own test automation framework. So those are some things to look out for, and we will see a couple of more examples as we go. We will go into um, deeper topics about how to restrict AI output to actually fit your need and things like that as we progress. So I'm just going to shift into a quick demo mode where we can look into, again, I'm sure this is something most of you have already experienced with or experimented with, but I'm just going to, for the sake of making sure that we are addressing all areas, we'll look at a quick demo of this. Um, for the Ask mode, I'm just going to go ahead and open the UI version of the Copilot, GitHub Copilot, in my public GitHub repo. Now, like I said, the simplest way to get started is to ask it questions, and it has some great auto suggestions. Like it's asking me, like it's already prompting me here that I could ask it to generate a high level overview of the repo. And just for the fun of it, I'm going to let it do that. The thing about AI is it is faster than you going through the repo one file at a time, but at the end of the day, for a machine, it does take a little bit of thinking time for it to come back with answers. And the more generic the question, or the quicker the answer is. But if you have more specifics, like context-specific information, or if it needs to connect to an API to fetch some information and things like that, there is a significant amount of latency that we need to factor in when using AI assistants. So once it's finished thinking, it's just letting us know that this is a Selenium repo. This is a web-based automation. And then it has a self-healing mechanism for locators, so on and so forth. It's great at summarizing what the tech stack is. It's great at summarizing the high level of what exactly this code is doing. Now, you could take it one step further and ask something much more technical and specific, like in the example that I was referring to earlier. We could make it come up with a regular expression, or in this particular instance, I have this test configured, this repo purposefully configured to run in a headless mode. What this means is it's not going to launch a browser. It's going to like do a WebDriver in the backend and run the test and just report the results. So I'm not going to be able to see what steps the test is actually performing. So if I'd like to understand, let's say this is a new repo I've inherited and I don't intuitively know like where to look for and change that configuration setting, I can ask it to find how can I change from headless to headed mode. I mean, you don't have to watch me type this, but again, I just wanted to illustrate a specific example where in the ask mode, it can come back and give us pinpoint the exact solution. Um, I, I wanted to also show this example because, so right now it came up with the answer that I needed to change the headless false to true to switch modes, and that will make my test run in the headed mode. This is a great answer. However, I've also noticed that if I keep asking this exact same question a bunch of times to the AI assistant, each time it comes back with a slightly different answer. So here it came up and said, hey, change your configuration. But I've also seen it go back and tell me that in the test where this configuration is called, it actually goes and edits this information so here you load the file, and it has also inserted an if statement at this point and said if the value of the headless mode is false, change that to true. So this is again a great example of how AI output is always not always the same, is not always on point with what you wanted done. Depending on what your process is and what you're comfortable doing. Let's say if you have a process within your team to not edit configuration files, then probably the latter answer is a better one. But if there is no such restriction, if you're just trying it out in your local mode, then definitely config is a much editing the configuration is a much more straightforward approach. So AI answers are not always fit. They don't always fit to your process, but they are pretty. I mean, you can pretty much get to the crux of things, but at the end of the day, it's up to you how you want your solution to be and what solution you want to accept versus reject. Now, this is a demonstration of a quick ask mode. We'll take a look at the same repo in my PyCharm where you could actually execute it in the agent mode. So agent mode is when it can autonomously make changes. Once again, you can set the context to any file or just in general, the entire repo, or if you're just trying to understand things, it could be your README, so on and so forth. So I'm just going to place the config.yaml in context, and I'm going to say change headless execution to headed. Once again, it's going to take a minute to think and analyze the file, but the difference between ask mode and the agent mode is it's going to actually make the change for you. So maybe the question I asked, so it's saying it is going to change headless to false when I thought it was going to tell me that it's going to change it to true. In any case, this is why we need the keep all versus undo option. So agent has actually made the change for you, but then like in this demonstration right now, it's just showing us how this isn't accurate. This isn't what we wanted to do because it hasn't really changed it. It just copied the file. Again, AI output is not always something you can rely on, but it does get you to the source of the problem super quickly, and then you can go ahead and accept or reject all changes. The other thing, I mean, this is actually a quite simple problem. You know exactly where to look for it, so it makes sense that it wasn't very hard for the GitHub Copilot AI assistant to find the answer for us. However, you can also do some pretty intrusive framework level changes if you would like. So let's say I want to implement, this is now simply a UI Selenium based test. However, if I want this test to also have a BDD cucumber like layer where there is a English like human readable feature file, I could ask AI to see if it can implement that layer into my test automation framework. So I'm not sure how far this will get to it, but let's see what it comes up with. So this is something for us to experience together. It may be able to do that successfully. It may not, but at least we understand what its limitations are going to be. So in this case, setting the context as config.yaml is not a great idea. It might be a good idea if you had some instructions on what your BDD layer you wanted it to look like. You can go ahead and provide those instructions as a you can provide those instructions as a prompt file, and then the AI agent will use the instructions in the prompt file and do this accordingly. Let's try a little bit of a stronger LLM model and see if it can do that. Right now, it looked like it gave us a text answer, but really did not execute anything, which is actually the core strength of an agent mode. So I'm going to say implement the BDD plan. And let's see what this comes up with. So it's going through the requirements.txt to understand what libraries I have access to. It's looking at my test. It's looking at the page. And then it's looking at the logic that I have for how to heal the locators. So straight away, it has added some files. And right now it's asking me if I wanted to add it to Git. I don't because I'd like to review it. But as you can see, for the test that we have, it pretty quickly generated a feature file. It quickly generated a feature file, followed that up with, so the BDD framework for Python is behave. So even if you are someone who does not know that, like, I mean, a lot of us come from different programming language backgrounds. And if you're from a Java background, you are probably used to Cucumber for Java, REST assured based API calls, and that kind of ecosystem. But that kind of friction where you have to like research and figure out which BDD network is, which BDD library is applicable for Python, it takes away the guesswork out of it. Again, it's up to you to once again review the outcome and decide if that's the library for you for long-term use or not. But again, initially, just to take the hurdle off of getting started, AI Assistant is a great tool for you. So right now, it has inserted a feature file for me, created step definitions, added a behave library that I could install. It also added an extra layer to the README so that the README for this repo is now current and accurate to what exactly the repo is doing. So again, that is an impressive amount of work that it does very quickly. But then now the onus is on you to go over all the changes that it has made and thoroughly understand what they are doing, their implications, and then if all is well, the next step is to keep the changes. Coming back to our presentation mode, we've now seen the demo of an AI agent in both the ask mode and the agent mode. Now let's pause here for a second and talk about some nuances here. The first thing is, so far we've been asking questions or prompting the agent or the ask mode of the AI assistant in like a simple question and answer format, right? We are asking it a straight question. It comes up with the best answer that it can think of in the time that it's got, and then we review it, and then we decide whether to go for it or not. We did not ask it to behave like a specific role. We didn't say, hey, you are a senior SDET who is a Cucumber expert, and based on that role, come up with a BDD framework. We didn't provide it that level of sophistication. We didn't ask it to assume a certain role. We did not ask it for specific examples either. So, for example, if let's say there is a certain style of features that your team writes in, there is a certain language, a certain format, or whatever are your rules. AI can work better if you can give an example to it and then ask it to emulate that similar behavior, but we did not do that. We also did not give it some pre-created prompt files. So pre-created prompt files, I'm sure a lot of you have already looked at it, but if you haven't, here's a quick example of what a pre-created prompt file can look like. So this comes from the Microsoft GitHub free resources, where this is a README generator prompt where you're asking it to assume the role of a senior software engineer, giving it specifics of what it needs to do, what it should not do, so on and so forth. So this will help frame better context for your AI assistant or the agent to come up with a README file that fits your needs. So, again, coming back to our demo, we did not do any of those. We did not assume a role, we did not provide examples, we also did not feed it any pre created context files. That is to actually keep this demo intentionally straightforward and low on complexity. And if you'd like to know, this style of prompting is also called a zero shot prompting, where you ask a direct question without giving it, like I said, any other additional info, and we get the answer. So over time, this kind of back and forth questioning for teams can get tedious because, again, this is a demo, so we have a very limited version of what we're doing. But in real time, it can come up with that feature file, and then let's say it is not and in accordance with your standards, you will have to go back and ask it to make edits. So that becomes a lot of back and forth. So teams will naturally progress towards using reusable prompt files like the one example that we looked at right now. So that could help in setting up the standards for whether it is test generation or if it is skimming through a log and coming up with whatever you're interested in grasping from the log file. So all the rules, once you have them formulated, it's a good idea to keep them as prompt files. Again, teams again will mature out of that stage too at some point. You will feel like all the prompting, everything, the prompt files will get heavier. They will have a lot more information. So they also start becoming unmanageable. Again, teams naturally progress and figure out what bottlenecks they will encounter with each approach. At that point, your AI can get a little more smarter, where it can fetch information real time, and you don't have to feed to it all the information in one go, either in flat files or prompt files. But that's something we can look at in a little bit later. The other nuance is, so one is the prompting. Like I said, we are using zero shot prompting for the sake of this demo, but then you could actually enhance your prompt to become self-learning. You could make it role-based, you could make it context-based, and all of that can also result in reusable prompt files. The other nuance is, again, like in the demo, it showed us that when we had a different LLM, like a GPT-4, which is a less powerful LLM, um, it prepared a plan for us to implement the BDD, but it did not, it could not actually make the changes for us. But once you've used a higher level of LLM, that made the job easier and the agent could actually function as an agent. This difference is especially critical if you are using an enterprise licensed AI assistant like Copilot. You have a choice of using different LLM models. Now, for all problems, we don't always have to get the big guns out. Like some problems, like I was telling you, a regular expression or finding headless versus headed mode of running. These kind of examples, in cases like that, you really don't need a high token utilization based LLM model. Because these licenses come with a certain number of tokens, they are limited. So it's a good idea to keep that token usage in mind as well. So for small problems, use simpler LLMs, and for harder problems or problems that need more research and that need more context, it's probably a good idea to go for a higher level of the LLM model. So I think we've basically touched upon the items that are in this slide. So let's just move on to the next use case again, which is using the agent mode not only for producing and enhancing tests. Some of the features that are available in the agent mode can reduce the collaborative workload as well. So for someone like me, I spend a lot of my time reviewing the PRs. And that's one thing that I always set aside a time of the day when I can give it maximum attention and focus. However, a lot of PRs, especially towards the end of a sprint, can and do really bog my day down. So over time, I've started using Copilot to generate me a gist of what changes happened during the PR. That's very similar to what we've just looked at when the AI agent will try to summarize the repo for you. So, similar to that, the AI agent can also summarize the PR for us. It can give us a high level overview of what exactly changed. You could also extend it to perform the review for you. Again, it will come up and flag a lot of things. One of the things it flagged on a recent PR was we have all of our secrets in CyberArk, but then the name of the account in CyberArk is not necessarily the username of the account whose password we were retrieving. So AI agent came up and said, "Hey, you're retrieving the password for one user, whereas you're passing the another user with the password that's retrieved." And Copilot flagged that as a problem, but that's not a problem because we know exactly how that's working internally. So it is good at finding general problems. For example, it will find things like if there is an assert statement that does not have detailed error message that needs to show in case of a failure. If you teach your AI to find such things like to-do items that are going in the code that need to be resolved, assertions that don't have clear message or imports that are unused. So you can define your rules on how the PR needs to happen. So in my case, I have a PR template markdown file, which is my prompt for how it needs to perform the PR reviews. And based on that, I can get quick feedback on the changes that went in and also the corrective action that needs to be taken. So I'm just going to go into a quick demo. I will not generate the PR gist or anything, but we'll just look at this. This is again an open source AI repo where it is cloud source, so folks can make their changes, create pull requests, and then we review it. And if everything's on point, it's okay to merge, and then we keep enhancing this open source repo as we go. So this is the newest PR that we have. Again, I've opened this in the UI mode of my GitHub, and I've asked the Copilot to summarize the high-level changes that were made as part of this PR. It's pretty good at tabulating how many files changed, how many comments went in, what was added, what was removed, and then the key changes. Again, these are very specific to the repo, so I wouldn't go into it. But then it can also, as an additional follow-up, review this PR. Again, if you note at this point, this is still the zero-shot way of prompting where we go step by step, not providing too much information. But if this were to be a work-specific repository, I would have the instructions that this PR review needs to be based upon. That way, I'll be more effective in catching the problems that I'm interested in catching. So personally, for me, it has reduced a lot of time going file by file and finding the changes. So this has been really a great way for me to actually improve productivity in terms of PR reviews. Again, this is just another use case where AI assistant can be very helpful. The next topic that we are going to move into is the MCP servers, a model context protocol service. So like we were looking at, zero shot prompting is great. You can get quick answers. Then adding context is great. Using the right LLM for the right context is also a really good idea. And then reusing instructions in the format of markdown prompt files. All of those are great ideas. But sometimes the answers to your QA problems don't always reside in one place. What I mean by that is, so practically an example that I can think of right now is we have one of the aspects of our test automation is to actually create SQL queries or to actually massage the test data through SQL queries so the test comes to a state where we can just execute the rest of the steps and get to the results quickly. So part of our automation is writing SQL queries depending on, what data we want to manipulate. Now, if it's just a one-time query that you like to write, Again, writing queries is not that complex, but it can also be something that is easily delegatable, right? It's not something, if you can write it, but if you would like that to be taken care of by the machines, this is a good use case for it. However, your AI assistant or your copilot does not have visibility into what your database design is like, what your database schema is, all of those good stuff that it needs to generate an accurate query. So you might actually provide a screenshot of the database schema, or actually maybe even a text file that tells the AI assistant what your database is going to look like, and based on that to generate the query. Now, one-time usage wise, you could either provide it a screenshots, but it is good to know that screenshots are actually heavier and costlier processing operations for AI, because then the AI assistant will have to use the OCR, optical character recognition techniques, to grab the text from the screenshot and then process it accurately. So if you're using a tokenized license, then please know that if you use screenshot-based operations, there will be a higher usage of tokens, and the latency is going to be higher. The time that it takes to generate a result is going to be higher. Text operations can work. Again, the onus is on you to copy the schema accurately and make it available for the AI assistant to process further. But then, if you had a connection directly to your SQL server or your database server of choice, where your AI assistant is able to go into it and have that visibility into what that table and schema is, you save yourself a lot of prompting time, a lot of, again, if we create a database schema and create a copy for it in our test automation, it's very likely to get obsolete the next time the database schema has changed. Maybe it won't change as often, but if there are good chances that it might. And when that happens, your AI assistant is going to work off of stale data. So real-time connections are great. Some of the examples can be, you can have your connection to GitHub, so you can look at other repositories. You could have an MCP connection to, so you could have an MCP connection to the SQL Server, like I was saying, or to a defect management database, or to Jira work management system, from which you can grab requirements and start generating tests. So MCP servers solve this problem of making the data flow seamlessly between the many touch points in your QA workflows. Now, this has to be used with caution, especially if you're using commercial LLMs, because your data is now then exposed to all these third-party companies, and that's probably not what you would like. In which case, there's a good case to invest in locally hosted LLMs like a Llama or something like that. So again, the details of establishing a connection to an MCP server, that is very, very specific to different tools of choice. However, for the sake of the demo, I'm just going to go into a quick repo that I created to just test out what this looks like, the whole entire process of reading a Jira requirement, passing that along to your test automation, and generating an API test based on that, followed by running the test and then reporting the results. So this again, some teams actually extend it further for the test run to go back and report the results into Jira. And some teams are extremely uncomfortable with having AI write into their work management software, and I completely understand that. So depending on the comfort level, the connection can be two-way or one-way, where AI just fetches information, does not write anything back, or it could just fetch and write also. So in this particular example, I just want to show you that if you would like to connect it to Jira or any other tool of your choice, it's pretty simple. For Jira especially, you could just provide a Jira URL and then the API token that comes with your license. Now, for the sake of this particular demo, I have marked my requirements. So to just give you an overview of what requirements it is basing the test generation on. So I'm not sure if you are any of you are familiar with this app called RESTful Booker, which is an API, free API that is available for people to practice API testing on. Sometimes it intentionally has bugs so that you get the full experience of it. So it has some endpoints for creating the booking, retrieving, updating, and so on and so forth. So I've just created like 5 basic requirements that we are mocking as if it's being fetched from Jira. And then what this repo also does is it provides instructions in the form of a prompt. Now, this is where we can experience what a little bit of upgrade from zero shot prompting looks like. So we are asking it to assume the role of a senior QA automation engineer. We are asking it to generate the tests, and then we are providing some constraints on what different endpoints are going to look like. Um, and then we are also saying that since this is a public API, do not do any destructive actions, like don't delete all data or that kind of thing. So based on this, again, I could run this code, but then it takes a while for it to generate the tests and run them. So I have a pre-created test report that comes out of this repo. So like I was telling you, it utilizes the RESTful Booker live API tests endpoint. And I've used the model GPT 5.2 and I'm using the OpenAI LLM. So this is not a custom LLM here. So for each requirement, AI has generated these tests for it. And then it also, since these tests are PyTest based tests and they don't really have to do with browsers and all that complexity, I find that it is easiest to just execute the API endpoint test from PyTest and then give me a pass or fail results. So as you can see, it's pretty effective. It's not a bad list, but again, at the end of the day, it's up to you to go through all of these tests and assess for fit, assess for edge cases, if they are correct in your context, so on and so forth. And depending on how you would like this report to be, you can go ahead and ask it to show us the requests that were made, the headers, the data that was sent, and the data that came out of execution, all of those good stuff. Now, if this were to be a end-to-end MCP server with Jira, the requirements should have been fetched from Jira. The test would be generated, run, and the result could go back into Jira, and you would have the entire context available for your LLM model, which is what it means by an MCP server. So the caution, so it is important for us to be very cautious about what data the AI is able to read. And if the data is, if you're in compliance with all your org rules in exposing that data to the MCP server. Now, most of the topics that we've looked at today are geared towards test automation and generate fast test generation, things like that. But AI can be really helpful in generating manual test cases and test scenarios. Now, the other day we had a complex MATLAB file with a lot of with implementation to one of our scientific experimental projects. And this isn't software development engineering thing. So it was much more generic and it was quite bulky. It wasn't really uh, formatted in a way for it to be easily absorbable. So I went into GitHub Copilot. I kind of put that file in context and asked it to generate test scenarios for me from Visual Code. So what I'm trying to say is the environment might be completely geared towards test automation, but what you ask of AI, you could just ask it to generate test scenarios. So that is nothing technical. It can just be like human readable one-liners of what your test intent can be for exercising the different code paths that are available in your source code. Similarly, even if you are not using it to that level, most of the enterprise software, test management software, such as Qtest or TestRail, they all have AI test generation feature embedded into them these days. So what that means is if you have a requirement, instead of so in Qtest, there is a generate test cases link historically, even without AI. And when you hit that, it would come up with a title for your test case based on the requirement title, and it would have that linking back to the requirement. So you were free to write the test steps as you see fit. But now AI takes it one step further. Not only does it establish the linking, it will also generate some test steps based on the context that it has, or in the absence of context. It will come up with some generalized tests on the extent of its understanding. So in the absence of the context though, so like I was giving you the example of that source code file and asking it to generate one-liner test scenarios, in that case it was pretty accurate. Those are kind of the test scenarios that I probably would come up with, but I might take like the entire day skimming through the code, following the different logical code paths. But then AI took probably maybe a few minutes to come up with that answer for me. But in that case, there was very little scope for it to imagine or create tests because it was strictly based on the context of that one source code file alone. But if it's something much more generic, like a payment feature or a booking feature or a login feature, since those features are somewhat ubiquitous, there's a very good chance of AI hallucinating on what those test cases need to be, if the context is missing for it. So if you are generating test cases from requirements, the quality of your tests are directly related to the quality of your requirements. The more detail you add to it, the more detailed your test cases are going to be, the more accurate your test cases are going to be. So for this part too, I have a quick demo. I created a simple chatbot based application to just test out what AI would do when I ask it to generate test cases for something as simple as a login. Now, this one has three steps to it. One is it will act as a senior QA engineer and develop structured test cases. Then I provide instructions on what fields I'm interested in having. And then I also embedded a validator into here and then a revisor. So basically, it will take my requirement, generate the test cases, validate based on the instructions that I provided, and then review them. Now, like I said, for this example, I've kept it pretty minimal and very simple because I want to illustrate um, the quality and the bulk, the volume of output that AI generates. So if I were to ask it to create a test cases or generate test cases for something as simple as testing a login behavior, and it needs to lock after 5 consecutive failed attempts. So as you can see, the first draft test cases, and this is the generator mode, it created number one, which is successful login, two, login attempt with invalid password, returning generic error, with unregistered email, account locking after 5 consecutive failed attempts, locked users cannot log in with valid credentials, account remains unlocked, submitting empty email and password shows generic error. So you see, for something as simple as that, I don't know if your team or my team or anybody would decide that these many test cases are necessary. So you might decide, oh, maybe one targeted test case that tests this particular case specifically is all we need, is probably the decision that you might go with. Or you could say, hey, you know what? AI has generated great test scenarios. So let me just make sure that we are thinking through these things and we are testing all of this and so on and so forth. So AI really takes out the problem of QA being a capacity problem. So historically, we couldn't, have adequate coverage for requirements or adequate automation coverage for our testing backlog, probably because there isn't enough time or resources to just churn every single possibility and write them down. But with AI, that problem goes away. However, the problem kind of shows up in how much work you'll have to review and how much work you'll have to maintain if you accept the AI output. So I could like go ahead and show you like in the initial review, it's doing a quick review for all the correctness, determinism, traceability, so on and so forth. And then it comes up with what kind of problems it found. And then finally, out of the 7 test cases it generated, it finalized 6, I believe. So again, AI output is very impressive. It is a lot of output for a little amount in a little amount of time. And the more input you provide AI, the more on point the output's going to be. In the absence of context, it really hallucinates and the results cannot be relied upon. So finally, again, I think it brings us to some of the good habits. We've touched upon them as we were speaking through these concepts in the presentation, but if I have to sum them up, the first is always review AI output. This cannot be said enough. We wouldn't think AI will make syntax errors. It wouldn't think it will cause builds to fail. So never send your AI generated automation test directly to the CI/CD pipeline. Always test it. In case of manual test case generation, always check if the results are correct and always check for determinism and hallucination risks, so on and so forth. Um, Based on this demo, it probably will look like zero-shot prompting is somewhat tedious, the back and forth question answer situation. And then prompt files seem like the logical next step, and they are in most cases. However, they can get bulky really quickly if you ask AI agent to perform a certain corrective action and to learn that for the future, what it's going to do is update the prompt file with whatever it has learned or the changes that it has just made. So these files can get really bulky really quickly. So at some point, you may have to consider strictly versioning the prompt files to make sure that they themselves are accurate and version controlled. Finally, MCP servers sound great, but they expose sensitive data to commercial LLMs. So that is something that needs to be vetted out completely for compliance before you decide that that's the approach you'd like to take. So we've reached the end, and I've talked a lot, so thank you for listening. But then this slide, I think, speaks for itself. At the end of the day, AI can really help take out the repetition in your tasks. It can help make some things easier. It can help you get to your destination faster. But then a tester's judgment still reigns supreme. AI is an assistant, at least that's how I see it, that's how I use it as. And like they say, all these tools, GitHub Copilot or all the Microsoft suite of copilots are called copilots for a reason. You are still the main pilot. So with that, I think we've reached the end of the session and I'd like to open the forum up for any questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Swati. I do appreciate the comment on warnings, which you made quite frequently, because that's what we've run into as well, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, trust it, but, right? And that's what we
Yes.
hear all the time. But your demos were
Mhm.
definitely helpful in sort of seeing what's actually been done, because that's not really a level I've dealt with. This is, a late career arrival from my point of view, and I'm not sure how much more career I'm going to have before it's like, nah, I'm not going to bother with that anymore. Anyway, we didn't have any questions during the session. If any of the people, I see we lost one late in the session, he probably wanted to go whenever. So Milan just sent a question in. Do you see it, Swati, or do you need me to repeat it?
Um, Not yet. I can see. Yeah, I can see it now. Have you seen
Okay, so I'll
any
just let you
movement?
answer quickly. Yeah.
Yes. So the question is, have you seen any movement towards using spec-driven testing? Um, yes, spec-driven testing, again, not going into specifics, most of the specs either translate into a prompt that can be especially customized to the expected outcome. So that's one way I've seen it. But if there's anything else that we are specifically referring to, I'm not sure.
I help mute it myself. Okay, thanks, Milan. Does that give you a good answer? Just know in the chat or just take yourself off mute and talk.
Yeah, it's probably quicker for me to just ask my question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can.
All right. Thanks for that. So, speaking from a development standpoint, as developers use these tools to uh, generate more code, some of the leading AI companies are promoting the use of specifications to drive software development
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to user stories. I'm not saying instead of user stories, but as a more formal way of specifying what code they want
Yeah.
generated versus behavioral. Are you seeing sort of the same, like when it comes to AI
Mm-hmm.
assisted test case generation?
Yeah.
Um, do you see or have you seen any similar adoption of more rigor around specifications as opposed to, behaviors, user stories, acceptance criteria, and that kind of thing? Let's say a little more rigor around that so that it matches the engineering discipline on the development side.
Right. So matching the engineering discipline on the development side is definitely a really good plus for a lot of test automation frameworks because it improves adoption and it exists in the same ecosystem. So things are much more, they flow much better between testing and development from my experience. But the spec-driven testing, I don't think we are doing that at a scale that the development teams are using. And I know what you're saying. So instead of driving something by behavior, we kind of templatize what we ask AI to do and make sure that the code that it generates is in compliance with that. Testing is still very user driven or behavior driven. So I haven't seen that happen, at least at a scale still. But I can see that having an application, especially for API tests, right? Because API tests are kind of low risk. And I've seen that, especially in where I work, we completely delegate AI testing, both for test generation. Again, AI tests, when they get generated, also they're easy for folks to review and make sure that they're doing what they're doing because there are very, very well defined parameters of what it means for an AI API call to be successful versus not. So that is something that is somewhat spec driven, but the UI testing is still very user centric.
If I could add to that, I do see a lot of people wanting to do this, Milan. Whether they're getting there or not, I don't know. But
Yeah.
I've attended some other places where it's like we need this in order to provide the rigor and the results we need, rather than coming at it from the back end. So I've seen lots of people request it. And
Mhm.
Swati's just answered whether it's there, which the answer is no, apparently not yet. Anyway. Okay, thank you, Milan. Any other questions? I know it's 12:59 here, so we're very close on to 1 o'clock. Yeah, okay, thank you for your contact information there.
Yeah.
If you want to get hold of Swati. Other than that, as I said, the it will be distributed. It takes a little while for it to process after we stop doing it. Well, thank you very, very much, Swati. Really appreciate that. And we'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you.